Hey, hello everyone. In this video, I am going to teach you about what happens when Jupiter is sitting in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart in Vedic astrology. So, before beginning, if you are not subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel, hit the bell icon and click the like button. And if you have any doubt after watching this video, please to mention it in my below comment section, okay? And yes, please to like and follow my Facebook community page, Parikshith Astrology, where you can also post some astrological stuff and gain knowledge. So, let's begin. So, what do you mean by Navamsa chart or the D9 chart? See, Navamsa chart or the D9 chart is the second most important chart of your birth chart. It is mainly seen for your status of your planet. It is also seen for your married life. It is also seen for your relationship between you and your spouse and also your marital life. Now, Navamsa chart or the D9 chart mainly gets activated after your second half of your life or after your married life. So, second half of your life means that is after 33 years or 36 years of your age. Now, coming to the strengthness of your planet. Now, let's say for example, if any planet is debilitated in your birth chart. Now, let's say for example, if Sun is debilitated in your birth chart and that planet Sun is been exalted in your Navamsa chart or the D9 chart, that shows that that planet Sun has gained extra strength or extra power. Now, coming to the married life. See, every individual divisional chart, including the main birth chart, has its own Karaka planet or the significator planet, right? So, suppose say for example in your birth chart, Sun is the Karaka planet or the significator planet, right? Likewise in your Navamsa chart or the D9 chart, Venus is the Karaka planet or the significator planet. So, Venus should be placed in an exalted sign, Multrikon sign, own sign or a friendly sign. That shows that your married life will be very good. Now, coming to the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart. Now, what does 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart represents? It represents your spouse appearance, your spouse characteristics and personality. It also shows your ability to compromise in the marriage. So, these are all the things can be seen through the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart in Vedic astrology. Now, what happens when Jupiter is sitting in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart? Now, what does planet Jupiter represents? It represents your teacher, it represents your guru. Both are same. It also represents your advisor, counselors. It also represents your guide. So, it also represents your finance. So, when Jupiter is sitting in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart, it shows that your spouse might become your guru or teacher or your guide. It also shows that your spouse in the married life or after your married life might teach you some lessons. So, you need to be like this and all. And it also shows that you have to take some responsibility in your marriage, because Jupiter will be aspecting to the first house. So, you need to take some responsibility also. And it also represents you will get lot of wealth from your spouse. Now, what happens when Jupiter is conjuncted with different planets like benefic planets and malefic planets? Now, coming to the benefic planets. Now, what happens when Jupiter is conjuncted with benefic planets like Moon, Mercury, Venus? Now, coming to the planet Moon. Now, what happens when Jupiter is conjuncted with planet Moon? Now, what does planet Moon represent? It represents your mind. It represents your emotion. It represents your mother. It represents your happiness. So, when Jupiter and Moon are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart, it shows that after your married life, you will get very good happiness from your spouse. Or it also shows that your mother's health will be very good, and it also shows that your spouse might be emotional, caring and all. Now, one thing you need to note down here is Jupiter alone in the 7th house shows that you might get a spouse who might be having very great ego, or you might get a spouse who might be very selfish also. Now, what happens when Jupiter is conjuncted with planet Mercury? That shows that you might get a spouse who might be business oriented, because Mercury represents business and it also represents logical ability and it also represents communication. Now, what happens when Jupiter is conjuncted with planet Venus? Now, what does planet Venus represent? It represents love, romance, it represents beauty, luxurious life. So, when Jupiter and Venus are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or Navamsa chart, it shows that your spouse loves money. So, because Jupiter signifies money, Venus signifies materialistic things and all, your spouse might love these things like money and all, and luxurious life, comforts and all. Now, what happens when Jupiter is conjuncted with planet Sun? Now, what does planet Sun represent? It represents king, government. It also represents ego. So when Jupiter and Sun are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or navamsa chart, it shows that you might get a spouse who might be working in government job, or any primary school teacher, like who might be working in government schools and all. And it also shows that you might get a spouse who might be having a lot of ego. And it also shows that you might get a spouse who might want to dominate over you. So these are all the things can be seen through when Jupiter and Sun are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or navamsa chart. Now what happens when Jupiter is conjuncted with planet Mars? Now what does planet Mars represent? It represents aggressive nature. So when Jupiter and Mars are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or navamsa chart, it shows that you might fight with your spouse because of the aggressive nature that spouse will be having. Now, what happens when Jupiter is conjuncted with planet Saturn? That shows that your spouse might be a little bit older than you, and it also shows that your spouse might look little bit old also. It also shows that your spouse might be very lazy and spouse need to work hard, so in the marriage. And it also shows that you need to take responsibility, lot of responsibility in the marriage, or your spouse might have to take that responsibility. So these are all things can be seen through when Jupiter and Saturn are conjuncted in the 7th house of the D9 chart or navamsa chart. Now what happens when Jupiter and Rahu are conjuncted in the 7th house? That shows that your spouse might be interested to argue with you or fight with you. It also shows that some way or the other there might be some relationship problems. So you need to be very careful here. Now what happens when planet Jupiter is conjuncted with Ketu? Now what does planet Ketu represent? It represents actually separation, divorce. It also represents isolation, so living far away from one's place. So when Jupiter and Ketu are conjunct in the 7th house of the D9 chart or navamsa chart, that shows that you might get divorced or you might get separated from your spouse, or it also shows that you might live far away from your spouse. So these are all the things can be seen through when Jupiter is sitting in the 7th house of the D9 chart or navamsa chart. So yep, this is it for today guys. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe below, or else I'll see you in the next video. So if you want any consultancy, please to contact to my given below WhatsApp number, or else you can even mail me also. So until and unless, thank you, bye bye, love you, take care.